My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how a small act of defiance in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Pine Grove Estates turned into a scandal that made the evening news. It all began last spring, when I decided it was time to give my backyard pool a much-needed facelift. The pool was a relic from the 90s, outdated, cracked, and far from the serene oasis I dreamed of. After a particularly successful year at my architectural firm, I finally had the funds to do it right. I followed every protocol in our HOA handbook. I submitted detailed plans, including material samples, and even a 3D rendering to show that the renovation would have minimal visual impact from the street. The proposal was modest, updating the tile work, adding some modern safety features, and installing energy-efficient equipment. Nothing over the top, just a tasteful modernization of the old design. The plans sailed through the initial HOA review meeting. 4 out of 5 board members voted in favor, with the only dissenting vote coming from Patricia Wellington, the newly elected HOA president. I should have seen the warning signs then, but I didn't. Patricia, a woman with a penchant for control and a need to keep things traditional, spent 15 minutes arguing that the proposed blue tiles were too Mediterranean for our neighborhood. But I had the majority vote, so I moved forward with the renovation. That's when the letters started coming. First, it was a notice about my grass being a touch too tall. Then a warning about my mailbox not being reflective enough. And when I installed a security camera doorbell, explicitly permitted in the HOA guidelines, another citation arrived, claiming that surveillance equipment visible from the street violated community rules. Each letter was signed by Patricia, complete with a little smiley face that somehow made it feel more like a threat than a friendly gesture. The pool renovation began on schedule, but that's when Patricia truly ramped up her campaign against me. Every morning, she would park her white Mercedes SUV across the street, camera in hand, photographing the workers and taking notes on her iPad. When I confronted her about it, she simply smiled her saccharine smile and said, "Oh, I'm just documenting all the violations for the monthly meeting, sweetie. Someone has to maintain community standards." I tried to be reasonable. I invited her to inspect the work up close, offered to show her the approved plans again, and even suggested we discuss her concerns over coffee. Her response? "I don't fraternize with rule breakers. It sets a bad precedent." Mind you, this was the same woman who had somehow managed to get approval for a giant unicorn-shaped topiary in her front yard. The renovation was nearly complete when I received an emergency notice from the HOA. According to Patricia, an anonymous resident had reported that my pool's new depth markers were in an inappropriate font instead of the traditional Times New Roman specified in Section 7.3.2 of the pool guidelines. The notice demanded that I cease all work immediately pending a special review session, which couldn't be scheduled for another 6 weeks due to procedural requirements. I was losing my patience at this point. I marched over to Patricia's house, guidelines in hand, ready to point out that there was no such font specification in the documents. She answered the door in tennis gear, holding a glass of white wine. Barely 11 a.m. She glanced at her nails as she spoke. "Oh, Sarah," she said, "I was just about to call you. The board has received several more complaints about your little project. I'm afraid we'll have to add those to the review agenda as well." That's when I noticed something strange. Her copy of the HOA guidelines, which was sitting on her entry table, was significantly thicker than mine. When I asked about the discrepancy, she just smiled and said, "This is the president's copy. It contains all the amendments that haven't been formally distributed yet. We have to maintain some executive privileges, don't we?" I left her house seething, but determined to handle this professionally. I immediately emailed the entire HOA board, requesting an emergency meeting to address the situation. 3 board members responded sympathetically, clearly unaware of these so-called amendments Patricia had been citing. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, much to Patricia's obvious displeasure. Little did I know the real drama was about to unfold. The following week, as the emergency meeting approached, I was feeling cautiously optimistic. 3 board members were on my side, and I was certain that the HOA's overbearing president couldn't continue her petty crusade without proper support. But Patricia was relentless. Her passive-aggressive tactics had already gone too far, and I was ready to stand my ground. But before I could even prepare for the meeting, Something strange happened one night. I had been working late in my home office, finishing up some client drafts when I heard the unmistakable sound of a truck backing up outside. I paid it no mind at first. There were always contractors, landscapers, or delivery drivers coming and going in the neighborhood. It wasn't until I heard voices outside my window that my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled up the live feed from my security cameras, only to see something I never could have anticipated. There in the alley behind my house was a cement truck, and standing next to it, wearing her usual designer workout gear, was none other than Patricia Wellington. She was overseeing the unloading of bags of cement, directing two very confused-looking workers who were clearly out of their depth. I couldn't believe my eyes. Patricia, the HOA president, was overseeing a cement delivery to my backyard at midnight. My heart raced. I quickly grabbed my phone, started recording, and ran downstairs to get a closer look. I was prepared to confront her right then and there, but little did I know this incident would take a turn I never saw coming. As I watched through the security feed, it became clear that Patricia wasn't the only one who had made a major miscalculation. The cement truck had parked right next to where my pool contractor had previously marked a critical underground power line. Patricia, in her obsessive pursuit of correcting my pool renovation, had managed to place herself directly on top of the exact spot where that power line was located. In her excitement to supervise the midnight operation, she seemed oblivious to the gravity of what she was doing. She didn't notice the unmarked police car parked down the street conducting its usual patrol, or the fact that she'd triggered my new security floodlights, which had lit up the entire backyard like a spotlight. And of course, she didn't realize that the situation was about to escalate far beyond her petty vendetta against my pool. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, watching the bizarre scene unfold as I mentally prepared for the worst. It was a tense moment, and though I was tempted to rush outside and confront Patricia face to face, something told me to stay quiet and let the night take its course. As I stood there in my pajamas, phone recording everything, the sound of a sharp crack pierced the air, the unmistakable noise of something snapping under pressure. I held my breath, fearing the worst, and that's when it happened. The cement truck's engine revved up. A loud bang echoed across the backyard, followed by the smell of burning rubber as the cement mixer jerked forward, throwing Patricia off balance and sending a cloud of dust into the air. I froze, not knowing whether to laugh, cry, or panic. In all her self-righteousness, Patricia had managed to put herself directly in harm's way. But it didn't end there. From the corner of my eye, I saw the flashing lights of the police car turning on, its siren whirling through the night. I didn't know if they were responding to the cement truck or if they'd spotted Patricia's blatant disregard for safety regulations. But what I did know was that Patricia was about to find herself on the wrong side of the law in a very public way. The next few minutes passed in a blur. By the time I made it out to my front porch to get a better look, Patricia was being questioned by the police. The workers had vanished, likely knowing they were in over their heads. Patricia stood there, visibly shaken, as an officer asked her about the unusual late-night cement delivery and whether she had authorization to make any alterations to someone else's property. I could hardly believe what I was witnessing. As the officer's flashlight shone on Patricia's face, she stammered, trying to explain her presence there. But no amount of excuses could cover up what was happening. The police were making notes, and I knew then that Patricia had finally crossed a line that could not be ignored. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. After months of her harassing me over trivial things, trying to stop my pool renovation at every turn, she was now the one in trouble. The tables had turned, and I had the perfect footage to prove it all. But the real shock came the next day. The incident made it into the local news, and suddenly, Patricia Wellington wasn't just the quirky HOA president who made a fuss over pool tiles. She was the face of a scandal that involved unauthorized construction, potential safety violations, and a very questionable use of HOA funds. The entire neighborhood was watching, and the media had a field day. But for me, it was the sweet taste of karma that made everything worth it. The morning after the midnight cement debacle, I woke up to a text message from a neighbor. "You're on the news. Turn on Channel 7. Confused, I flicked on the TV, only to see footage of Patricia standing with the police, her hands on her hips, clearly caught in the middle of something much larger than a petty neighborhood dispute. The anchor spoke solemnly. In an unexpected turn of events, the president of the Pine Grove Estates HOA was involved in an incident last night after a cement truck arrived at a private residence without proper authorization. Authorities are investigating what appears to be an unlawful attempt to alter a neighbor's pool construction. The footage panned to Patricia, still looking disoriented, and I felt a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. How had it come to this? The story quickly gained traction. Turns out Patricia had been attempting to pour the cement to cover up what she considered to be unauthorized alterations to the pool. She had tried to prevent any more work from being done by making sure my renovation would be permanently damaged, and even tampering with the area at night was, in fact, a criminal offense. It was all over the local news within hours, and by the end of the day, Patricia had been charged with tampering with private property and was under investigation for potential vandalism. The board's emergency meeting happened the following week, and while Patricia tried to salvage her position, the rest of the HOA members had seen enough. 3 board members resigned, citing a loss of trust, and the remaining members voted overwhelmingly to remove Patricia from her post. She was no longer the HOA president. In the aftermath, the focus shifted from my pool renovation to the real issue: how Patricia had used her power to harass and manipulate the homeowners in our community. People started to reach out to me, offering support, apologizing for not standing up sooner, and even thanking me for finally taking action. It was humbling, but also an eye-opening experience about the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. As for me, I was finally able to finish my pool renovation. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for anyone who had ever felt intimidated by an overzealous HOA or an authority figure abusing their position. In the end, my pool became the symbol of resilience and the triumph of fairness. But what did I really learn from this whole experience? First, I learned that it's easy to get caught up in the small battles. It's easy to focus on the immediate annoyance, whether it's a letter about the grass being too tall or an overly critical HOA president, because it feels like a personal attack. But sometimes those little annoyances are just the tip of the iceberg. When someone abuses their power, it can affect the whole community. Second, I learned the importance of documentation. The security cameras that I'd installed as part of my own home security ended up being invaluable witnesses to the entire situation. Without the footage, there would have been no concrete evidence to back up my claims. The camera footage wasn't just a tool for monitoring my property. It became the key piece of evidence that helped expose the truth. Lastly, I learned the power of staying calm and thinking strategically. When everything inside me screamed to confront Patricia right away, I decided to step back and let things unfold. That decision allowed me to gather the right evidence and let the authorities handle the situation. If I had acted impulsively, I might have ruined my own case or escalated things in a way that would have been harder to resolve. Patricia's actions may have made her the villain in this story, but her downfall wasn't just due to her behavior. It was also the result of her overreach. She forgot that with power comes responsibility, and when you misuse that power, the consequences can be much more far-reaching than you ever intended. So as I relax by my newly renovated pool, I reflect on the bizarre turn my life took last spring. In the end, the greatest lesson wasn't about the pool or the HOA. It was about standing firm, trusting in the truth, and letting justice unfold in its own time. After all, sometimes karma has a funny way of making its own appearance.